Hi class, my name is Jesus Perez and my final paper is on cultivation analysis theory. And I'm going to start with the theory itself. Cultivation theory examines the long-term effect of television and how the population perceives their world according to their exposure. The main proposition of cultivation theory is that the more television you watch, the more you're disposed to the perception of what you're watching. The theory divides the population into two groups, light and heavy viewers. Heavy viewers are those who watch the most in any sample of people that are measured, whereas light viewers are those who watch the least. The theory talks a lot about the effects of what you watch on television and how watching a lot of violent programs or a lot of news that usually focuses on anything that's scary and frightening will affect your perception of the real world. It was developed by George Gerbner in the 1960s in the response to the pervasiveness of television in society. So you got to remember back then television was just starting to get pretty big, started to appear in everybody's house, and color was just introduced as well, I believe. So he noticed, that society was getting hooked on it and decided to try to ask some questions and explain them, and wanted to know how it would affect our society. Cultivation theory uses the approach of empirical scientific. Empirical, he tries to predict people's perception of the world based on the amount of television that they watch. Scientific, it's scientific as he would gather data. He would gather data from his scientific experiments he would run on people. Theory evaluation. So when I evaluated this theory, I used three of the criteria for evaluating communication theories. I used scope, and I felt like when the theory was developed, it fell within the limits and the scope of what was happening at the time. Now in the 1960s, this was more of a macro approach to understanding the theory. It kind of put everything in one bucket, right? Like how much TV do you watch? There's only two viewers, the heavy viewers and the light viewers. Of course, a lot of you had TV. Over time, as technology and programming on television changed, we had to use different approaches. You can you would have to look at it more as in a micro approach. The parsimony is another criteria that I used. And this talks about how practical the theory is. It's pretty easy theory to understand. I mean, basically, the more television you watch, the more influences your life, and that's exactly what he was trying to answer and describe in it. So I feel like that is, even to this day, it is pretty good evaluation of the theory. Now, the test of time was the last one I chose. The theory, was introduced in the 60s, and it still has been, it still is being applied to this day. Obviously, mass communications, technologies, programming, television has come a long way since then. So the theory had to be like reinvented and reapplied in different ways. And current theory status. Today, the theory has spawned a lot of subcategories given to how programming is in television now, how accessible television is. Not only it has branched off not only from television, but social media, being able to watch TV 24/7, things like that. One of the most interesting, you can call it a subcategory of cultivation theory, is genre-specific cultivation, which seeks viewers that watch certain kinds of genres. One of them that kind of stood out was the makeover program. People that are exposed to a lot of makeover programs relate negatively to their body and self-esteem. And then another one I thought was interesting is that males that watch reality dating shows are more likely to hold stereotypical perceptions about dating, and they're more likely to view women as sex objects. Another interesting one was Greg Anatomies. This is the only example I found where they didn't just go for a genre. They made it very specific to one show, and they found that people that watch Greg's Anatomy found doctors to be more courageous than people that didn't, which kind of makes sense. Obviously, the show is about doctors who save lives. That's the current status of the theory. Morgan and Shanahan are a couple authors and that are or scientists, I should say, that are trying to expand the theory and move it forward. Improving the theory. I believe that cultivation theory does not need to be improved, but rather needs to be further developed to keep up with social trends, cultural trends, and technology advancements. The theory needs to be applied to modern day issues such as fake news, the accessibility of technology, and the unintentional exposure to mass communications. And I feel like Morgan and Shanahan are doing a very good job of trying to apply to different or a better set of applying it to modern day technology and modern day programming. Conclusion: mass communication affects every person in the world, directly or indirectly, especially these days with social media and with easy access to news and media with your phone, with smartphones. So I feel like we need to keep pushing this theory forward and applying it not only at a macro level but at a micro level, and dig deeper to understand how mass communications, how social media, video games, modern technology, everything affects how we perceive the world. Also, individuals ourselves, we need to be aware of this, and we need to act accordingly and understand what we're watching and how it is affecting us. George Gardner went in front of Congress actually to talk about the dangers of violence in television and being exposed to it for so long. I have a quote here that I found was really interesting. This quote is from when he was giving his testimony. He was giving his testimony at the time to. He was giving his testimony to the House of Representatives, the U.S. House of Representatives, and he and this is what he had to say. He had to say that fearful people are more dependent, more easily manipulated and controlled, more susceptible to deception. Simple, strong, tough measures and hardline posture, both political and religious. They may accept and even welcome repression if it promises to relieve their insecurities. That is the deeper problems of violence through television. He said this when he was giving his testimony before U.S. House of Representatives back in October 21st of 1981. So I feel like this theory helps us explain how what we're exposed to affects us, and I feel like we need to keep developing it and keep pushing it further to better help understand ourselves and society. Thank you guys. Have a good night.